Dr. Oz got interviewed by NBC News, of course, running for Senate in Pennsylvania against John Fetterman. And I have a few moments from it to take a look at with you. And pretty interesting. The first is he gets asked about crime. You talk a lot about crime. What specifically do you want to do on it? And he gets into some story about how he's seen a lot of people be subject to crimes. Well, but what do you want to do specifically? And that's what I'll show you. Later on, he talks about school choice could help or bringing money could help. But it seems like so many of these Republicans who are complaining about crime don't actually have specific policy prescriptions that would solve the problem, which is a common occurrence in politics. Politicians are often real good at identifying problems and preaching aggressively about the problems without proposing legitimate solutions. Take a look at this.
I think a lot of the time when politicians talk about crime, it's very vague.
Oh.
Crime, what are you talking about?
I remember being an intern in the emergency room and opening a chest almost every night of some young gladiator. Never thought it would happen to him. And it's tragic for many reasons. One is a young life that's not going to be able to live to its full amount, but you also have to talk to the family and the pain in their lives, which will never be forgotten, is also made worse by the fact that it was traumatic. And then I'd often see the person who shot the victim, because they often get hit as well. And there's this very deep sorrow as they realize something that is not allowed, never tolerated, yet they did it, has occurred. They took a human life. And you realize the devastation on both sides. So I have a very visceral awareness of the...
So whenever you're asked specifically, what would you do from a policy perspective? Is that the time to jump into a story? I don't know. Again, it goes on for like 5 minutes on this topic. She keeps pressing, and finally there's some vague things proposed. School choice was one of them. How that would connect, I don't know. But that was interesting. And I agree, it's heartbreaking, and that's a very interesting experience that he's had being on the front lines, responding to at least the medical side of crime, but doesn't exactly answer the question. And then take a look at this next moment.
In draconian rules that do not allow judges to judge.
What about the death penalty for drug dealers, which your endorser Trump has advocated for?
I think that a appropriate, potentially death penalty, but an appropriate harsh penalty for people especially bringing fentanyl into this country, and this is important, making it look like candy, which is how a lot of these crises are happening. That, if a child dies taking candy that looks like fentanyl, or fentanyl looks like candy, that's a problem, and that's a murder. So however you treat murder should be how you treat those folks, and it might be the death penalty.
So what she asked him about was Donald Trump has been saying at rallies recently that he is for the death penalty for drug dealers. Whoa. I mean, yeah, people shouldn't drug deal, but the death penalty, that's a little extreme. And one of the things that's been highlighted is the only countries that do that are some not to be sought after countries, we'll say, as far as the reality on the ground for the citizens. And I think he can't publicly violate what Trump said, but then also probably knows that's a little bit weird. So he bent it around to people who lead to the death of someone directly. Like, yeah, if you could say someone gave candy to a kid and it killed them, that would be murder. And it is super horrible what a lot of these individuals are doing with the drugs that are super dangerous and are killing people. But I'm someone who even for murder doesn't think the death penalty is the correct decision, because as we talked about, it's more expensive than just keeping them life in prison. We've also wrongfully convicted way too many people to get the death penalty who, after DNA evidence was brought to the surface, they were actually innocent, and then they got put on death penalty or death row, and that's just like a horrible thing we never want to do. And also just the idea of the state killing you for killing someone is a little bit bizarre, but thinking that drug dealers should get the death penalty is definitely very extreme. Next, he says that John Fetterman was asked if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you do? And he said, get rid of life in prison. Now, I don't know if that happened or not, but it was hilarious because the interviewer goes, well, I asked him that question, and his response was codifying Roe v. Wade and abolishing the filibuster. So is that really the stance you want to take? Take a look.
When John Fetterman is asked, if you could wave a magic wand, what's the one thing you would do? The one thing. And he says, well, I'd get rid of life in prison. Really? I mean, I'd fix the economy. Actually, I don't need a magic wand to do that. I can just get serious about stuff that's affecting a lot of people. Getting rid of life in prison is not the number one goal.
Well, I asked him that. He actually said it would be codifying Roe versus Wade and abolishing the filibuster.
When John
I love that moment. Well, no, at least from my experience, what he said was Roe v. Wade and abolishing the filibuster, which absolutely beautiful response to that question. There's a million things. Oh, I would wave the magical wand and make our country perfect. You could say that. But Roe v. Wade, huge. And then if you could abolish the filibuster, that would allow the Democratic Party to get so many things done that they can't get done right now, because of course the filibuster causes a situation where in the Senate, the threshold to pass things is up to 60 votes, which means to pass anything that isn't budget related, because that can be passed on a 50 vote margin through reconciliation, you have to get 60. And that means you got to get Republicans on board, which is very rare. If you abolish the filibuster, it would just be a simple majority vote necessary, and you could pass a lot more things. So very good response there from Fetterman to the NBC interviewer's question. I like how she brought it up there. And then he's asked about his thoughts on Black Lives Matter.
At your Safer Streets event a few weeks ago that we came to, you handed out a pamphlet with a lot of information. In one section called Justice for George Floyd, you said racial targeting is unacceptable. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement?
I don't, because I think it was a hijacked effort to address some of the deep problems we have with race in America. And I don't think the Black Lives Movement did justice to the real struggle that we have. I've worked in these areas quite a bit, both as a clinician, but also on the show. We started #MoreBlackDoctors because there's some obvious problems that happen in the practice of medicine when it comes to black folks.
At your Safer Street.
Good that you recognized the fact at the end there, but I will say if someone asks you, do you support the Black Lives Matter movement? It should be an easy yes, because the movement is talking about the general pursuit from Americans, nationwide, to try to raise issues that hurt black people disproportionately and try to get some justice there. It's fine if you have mixed feelings on the Black Lives Matter organization, because that's you endorsing a particular set of individuals who may have different approaches and et cetera, et cetera. But the movement is one that I think is absolutely beautiful and is easy to throw your support to. The only thing that my main critique of the Black Lives Matter movement and the organization is, and this is probably more to do with the politicians we currently have, the lack of action we've been able to get because of the movement, if that makes sense. And again, that's because the politicians aren't following the will of the people in this situation. But all of the 2020 protests led to really not at all the amount of significant legislation that we should have gotten and reform that we should have gotten after all of that. And that's my main critique of at least that moment. It's such a sad thing to think about, that with all the people that took to the streets, with all of the ideas that were proposed, nothing really got done in the grand scheme of things. And that's really heartbreaking. But there it is, Dr. Oz. We really want to see him lose to John Fetterman. It looks like John Fetterman has a good shot at doing so.